Hi all, I have a fascinating and pretty rare Bobby Fischer game to show you today. So this was played in a 1964 clock simul against Mosh Shifrine. This is featured in some online databases, but not in my main Bobby Fischer books that I have on my bookshelf actually. It's quite a rare game from this 10-board simul, so apparently played in Davis, California, April 16th, 1964. Let's have a look at it. E4 from Fischer, E5, knight C3, knight C6, bishop C4. So this is a very interesting way of playing the Vienna game. The move G3 might be a much safer move in general to check out, but bishop C4, very interesting. If that knight hadn't moved and there was knight F6 instead, black might be considering here knight takes E4 for D5. That bishop can be a tactical liability sometimes. But the knight does come here to F6, and it does mean that knight takes E4 might be on the cards. And perhaps this is compounded by Fischer's next move F4. So slightly controversial here in the opening, because this also can sometimes weaken this diagonal, making it uncomfortable for white to castle. A move like D3 might be more solid here, supporting E4 against that sort of tactic, knight takes E4 for D5. And if knight A5, yes, white might have to depart with the light square bishop. It should be at least equal for black. But here, yeah, a slightly controversial move from Fischer, intriguing. We have bishop C5. So black misses the opportunity perhaps to play knight takes E4 here to test this setup. Knight F3 might be white's best practical try, and maybe this is what Fischer had in mind, this kind of interesting gambit, because he was playing some pretty interesting gambits in these simul displays. So, but this position would be bad, losing the bishop. So white has to do a bit better than that. Yes, if we look at this position, white has to be careful. So if queen e2, then black must have equalized. So it's a little bit controversial, actually, this gambit. But if knight takes e4, black with d5, this mechanism is still pretty powerful here. For example, this position, black's doing very well. So slightly controversial, but it's bypassed after f4, this opportunity of knight takes e4. Black played bishop c5. We have knight f3. D6, D3, and now bishop G4. And this is a position I've found myself in on numerous occasions. I'm wondering where I've gone wrong. Actually, it is a little bit on the dodgy side, this position. White now plays H3. Black takes on F3. Queen takes F3. And now Queen E7. This is interesting, actually. There's a forcing move which might be considered knight d4, looking at c2 and hitting the queen. And if white wants to be adventurous, then queen g3. And it's quite fascinating, some of the variations here. For example, if black castles, f takes, giving up a rook. This looks very strange, but actually white here might actually be doing very well. For example, splat, winning the queen. But there are numerous, very interesting lines here, as I say. Instead of castling, knight takes c2 check immediately, and giving up g7, king d7 here, not king e7, because queen f7 is checkmate. But king d7, this is a wonderfully interesting variation, where it seems as though it ends up being about even. So fascinating stuff. That knight d4 is another test of white's play. So anyway, in the event of this game, in fact, knight d4 wasn't played. Queen e7 was played, and Fischer actually now takes the opportunity to pin that pesky knight before it goes into d4. Okay, it looks like a real strange opening, moving this piece twice, but actually it's a pretty strong move in the situation now to try and inflict at least structural damage on black, as much structural damage as possible. If Fischer had played bishop e3 here, then again it seems as though with knight d4 and threatening c2, this position should be okay for black, should be equal. So queen e7, bishop b5, A6, encouraging some structural damage. It seems Fischer's found his opponent's weakness in terms of pawn structure. Knight E2. If bishop D2 had been played, then maybe rook B8, and there's a little bit of play here for black, with bishop D4 being awkward. So this awkwardness is kind of avoided, it seems, with knight E2, a bit of prophylaxis there against the B-file pressure. Knight D7, F5, not minding gaining space. Here, bishop D2, A4, fixing down A5, knight f6, G4. So white seems to be in a very comfortable way at the moment. D takes, B takes, structurally much better. So here, yes, it seems as though, despite the slightly provocative opening, Fischer's got away with things and has a very comfortable advantage now, building up on the king side. Black castled queen side. If f takes G5, HG, and black castles queenside here, the structural damage is quite a lot. White's definitely much better here structurally and has that passed pawn. So castling queenside, G takes in, same sort of thing actually. So white's much better here at the moment. Bishop E3. We've got double pawns, we've got an isolated pawn, we've got an isolated pawn here. Okay, knight B6, and in fact, to avoid any hassle on dark squares, weakening dark squares, this knight was just snapped off, and now knight H5, rook HG8, rook HG1, we have rook takes, bishop C5, queen D3, so it seems all very pleasant at the moment, and in fact the queen's looking to go to A6, which black didn't seem to do much about here, actually played bishop D4, so C3, bishop C5, queen A6 check. So this looks very pleasant. If the queen comes over there, then taking a knight f6 looks dangerous. But here, after king b8, Fischer perhaps thought this is it, actually, with this next tactic. Can you guess what Fischer played? I'll give you 5 seconds to pause the video here. Okay. Knight takes f6. It turns out black might have a good resource here. One of Fischer's more naughty quotations, you could say, not so generous, was Patzer sees a check and gives a check. The opponent may not have been a Patzer actually at all, but did play this check. And there is a tendency for many of us to gravitate towards the forcing variations because they give less options to opponents, so they are often quite lucrative, but sometimes they might improve the opponent's position, so that's something to bear in mind. So, you know, there is an upsides of being forceful in chess in general, but here it seems, instead of the check immediately, actually, for example, queen f6 outright loses to this rook d7. That's the idea here, that black would have to give up the queen to stave off checkmate. So that's a very, very good idea. But it turns out there's another resource here. Can you spot what black can do instead of having a fatal weakness for the last move? What can black do here? If I give you 5 seconds, what is the amazing resource, you think, for black in this position? Okay, it turns out rook d8, and actually this knight's a bit of a liability. It's kind of trapped because this bishop's cutting across this diagonal, this fine bishop in general, if it wasn't for the king safety issues. And so the knight has to go back to g4, then h5 is the strongest move. This is stronger than queen takes h4. So with h5, what happens? For example, queen e2, snapping off the knight, that doesn't look very convincing. Black's getting a big advantage here. Yeah, so this position's strange. It's just looking very bad. If we go back here, so on rook d8, if rook takes d8 first, yeah, this position, knight takes e5 is another critical route, and this might be the thinking, you know, why accept this position? This looks very, very scary. White's just snapped a centre pawn, threatening knight takes c6. It turns out here Now all the forcing stuff is actually wonderful. This is the really appropriate time for the forcing stuff with bishop e3 check. And whatever white does, white's in big trouble here. King b1, queen d1 check, and looking at a4, so there's another pawn being picked up with check. Yeah, material's being picked up with check, which is a wonderful thing to have. So queen d3, queen takes e5, and if knight d3, then b5 cuts off the protection of the knight. And this is starting to look really nasty. There's all sorts of things on king c2. You know, it's starting to look like, yeah, it's very dangerous indeed. So black will be getting a big advantage there. So it seems, yeah, this was a situation, rook d8, which is very, very tricky. So knight g4, h5, and rook takes, yeah, it's just very, very tricky here. Queen takes h4, just for the record. There's queen e2. And this position is slightly different as knight h2. And this is safe enough for white. But, yeah, the immediate h5 here, just encouraging knight takes e5 fascinatingly. But it's only a simul. Fischer's playing a 10-board simul here, so you can forgive his optimism perhaps for knight takes f6 quite easily. Simuls are quite an exercise in chess in general. So bishop e3 check. This helps white. Yes, this does help Fischer quite a bit. This check here. We have now rook d8. Rook takes d8, queen takes d8. And now queen e2, getting a tempo off that bishop. Bishop c5, knight h5, queen takes h4. So what's going on here? f6, there's a dangerous passed pawn. Queen h3, f7, queen c8 now. Knight f6. And actually the game ended here. Maybe the opponent was convinced, seeing some of the dangers. For example, queen f8, there's knight d7 check, a nice fork there. But it turns out here that this resignation, maybe Fischer had been lingering on the board and psyched out the opponents. This resignation may have been a bit premature, actually, funny enough. Can you see what black could have played on with here, according to, I mean, if this is the actual game score of that game. But black, if this was the position, black has a move here. Can you see if I give you 5 seconds? Okay, queen e6. Yeah, just going, you know, for the pawn, hitting the knight. If knight g8, queen takes, knight takes. This position is equal on pawns. And it looks as though it should be fine. Even if black loses an e5 pawn there, check. And b5, for example, is a punishment. And white would have to be the one going for a perpetual check, for example, like this in this fictional variation. But it seems as though, yes, it was a premature resignation here. So a slightly controversial Fischer game from a simul. You probably have not seen this game ever before. It's interesting from, I believe, a nostalgic point of view to look at Fischer's use of the Endgame experimentally in that opening with knight c3 and then bishop c4. It seems, yeah, he did seem to be fond of this idea against also knight f6 to be able to play bishop c4 in that opening in the Vienna game. Intriguing stuff, I thought. But a safer recommendation than this whole bishop c4 on move 3 is g3. So we go to this position. The safe recommendation of g3 is made in this free interactive course on the Vienna game, Kingscrusher TV/Vienna. It seems far safer if you want to play knight c3, just to play it like this, just simply fianchetto on the king side and play it like a kind of king's engine with white, king's engine fence with white. Sometimes you don't want to block this f pawn, you play knight ge2 and f4, f5 and gain a space advantage like that. This might be the least controversial way of playing things, rather than bishop c4, which is in this game. Intriguing though, and yeah, of great historical interest for Fischer, experimenting with systems like this. Okay, hope you got something out of it. Thanks very much.